Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Maryanne Diamond, and I'm the chair of the International Disability Alliance, a network of global and regional organisations of persons with disability organisations. And I'm here today speaking on behalf of the disability stakeholders here in Sendai. 2015 is a time for many global actions, bringing together governments, civil society, international cooperation agencies, the private sector, academia, and other stakeholders from around the world to determine a global course of action on issues like poverty, ending poverty, protecting the environment, addressing climate change, and focusing on disaster risk management and reduction. Linkages between these important frameworks cannot be ignored, and we've heard that mentioned many times this week. Mitigating disaster risk and increasing community resilience cannot be achieved by limiting to disaster risk reduction framework alone. Rather, it needs to become a key component of the post-2015 development agenda. The success of the MDGs must be safeguarded from setback through disasters, and therefore there is a need to hardwire disaster risk reduction framework into the post-2015 development agenda. According to ISDR, disasters are often described as a result of the combination of exposure to a hazard, the conditions of vulnerability that are present, and insufficient capacity to cope with potential negative consequences. Poverty and exclusion are two such conditions known to increase risk of people facing a disaster. A number of studies show that disability is closely linked to poverty, and persons with disabilities are often the poorest members of our communities. Research also shows that persons with disabilities and their families are disproportionately affected by disasters. And this is mostly because they're excluded from the planning and implementation of disaster risk reduction efforts. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities calls for non-discrimination in all policies and programs, whether they relate to disaster risk reduction, climate change, development, poverty alleviation, or any other area of life. To ensure non-discrimination of persons with disabilities, we require a proactive approach aimed at identifying and removing exclusionary factors which prevent us from having access to preparedness, prevention, mitigation, and relief services and programs. The negative impact of disasters on a local area is determined by the fragility of the development process, and to achieve sustainability and harmonious development within an area, the DRR that includes all must be tackled from the perspective of best practices implemented in the building of our societies. To ensure inclusion of persons with disabilities, there are some key areas where there is a need to cross-link with the post-2015 agenda, and these include all involved stakeholders in the implementation of the 2015 frameworks should consider persons with disability key stakeholders and partners. They should do this in order to foster cooperation to ensure all available resources are used to build up greater inclusion and resilience at all levels. All poverty eradication and development programs must be inclusive and accessible to persons with disabilities on an equal basis. They should systematically increase resilience to disasters of people living in poverty. All construction projects, either undertaken under a development agenda or as a Build Back Better activity under post-disaster reconstruction, must include the principles of universal design. Building codes must address accessible design components to ensure all buildings and infrastructure are accessible to everyone. All data related to post-2015 development agendas and to disaster risk reduction framework must be disaggregated based on age, gender and disability to aid better planning, implementation and monitoring. Persons with disabilities must have access to basic services such as clean drinking water, food, shelter and sanitation facilities on an equal basis with others, in both disaster situations and in other times. These facilities must be provided in an accessible environment. Evaluations of both emergency and development programs in areas affected by changing climate need to clearly include disability in their terms of reference. And the monitoring processes of disaster risk reduction frameworks must be linked to all other monitoring mechanisms through the post-2015 agenda and ensure the coherence and complementary data is shared between these two frameworks. Ladies and gentlemen, in every community there's persons who have disabilities, whether acquired from an accident, a disaster, an illness, or just growing old. And it's important that what we do for persons with disabilities will be a benefit to the whole of community. And the way to achieve this is to include persons with disabilities and their representative organisations in all aspects of planning, implementation, monitoring and evaluation of all programs. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions. Is there any?
We heard that data desegregated based on disability has been adopted by the states in the DRR framework. How do you think that is going to really benefit?
Thank you. As we know from the World Report that was done in 2011, there's 15% of the world's population living with disabilities. That's 1 billion persons. So that is a huge number and percentage of our population. And if we add to that 1 or 2 family members for each person, that is a huge percentage of people impacted by disability. And I think it's excellent news that we hear that disaggregation of data by disability will be included in the DRR framework, because data collection is in some countries what we have not had traditionally, which then means planning is very difficult. I think the greatest thing I'd like to see is congratulate to this event for this inclusion, but also take that to the negotiations of the SDGs in New York to ensure that we get the same kind of collection of data in that framework too.
Madam, my name is Ahmed Kamal. I am representing Government of Pakistan. We in our National Disaster Management Plan have already formulated framework for the vulnerable groups, including the girl child, women, elderly, with disability inclusive considerations. Let me also share on this, on behalf of the country, that the disaggregated data is the important considerations towards that. And we being also the member of the regional consultative group on data loss and damage, we are ensuring that this is not only practiced at the national level, but it should be taken up as a joint effort at the regional and the global level. Thank you.
Thank you. It's excellent to hear that Pakistan is doing such good work, and in the fostering of international cooperation, it would be, as you suggest, important and necessary to share at regional and international level so we can learn from what you've done and include that in some of the national plans. Any more questions or comments?
One more question. Do you know of any initiative in Latin American for people with disabilities in disaster risk reduction plan?
We heard a presentation this morning from, I can't remember, it's Carlos, I forget his second name, Carlos from Chile, who's done a lot of work in inclusive communities, and last year won a prize in Latin America for that work. I can give you his details after the session,
Thank
when
you.
I remember his name. Any more? Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope that I've been able to share with you a little about the importance of inclusion of persons with disabilities in all of the planning, implementation, monitoring and evaluation of disaster risk work. Thank you.